Welcome, everyone. On behalf of my co-hosts at Fogarty Innovation, Stanford Biodesign, and Stanford Surgery, it's a real privilege to welcome you all to Fogarty Lecture number 24. This is a hybrid. Yeah, I know. Yes, it's good. This is a hybrid event, so there's about 80 people here in person and about 300 people out there in Zoom land. So for those in Zoom land, this is a one-way broadcast, so you won't be seen or heard, probably. Don't do anything really stupid. And finally, the broadcast is being recorded, and we'll have it available on the web for future education. 400 people here, pretty special on a hot Friday afternoon. And I think that says a lot about the lectureship and its tradition, the Silicon Valley MedTech ecosystem, and our speaker, Mir Imran. Yes. We put this together 24 years ago to provide an annual forum to provide and promote MedTech innovation, innovators, and to expand the educational opportunities for our young people, first at Biodesign and now at Fogarty Innovation, so that in the end the outcomes are improved care for the lives of our patients whom we all serve. And Tom Fogarty is a tireless champion, as is Mir, for, the customer is the patient, period, end of story, solve their problem and everything will be fine. The lectureship also celebrates bringing together like-minded people like you all, my Texas beginning to kind of creep in this remarkable ecosystem of innovation with Dr. Fogarty in his very central role and ditto Mir Imran. Tom Fogarty's contributions are legendary: the Fogarty balloon catheter, Hancock tissue valve, aortic stent graft, more than 50 successful medtech companies, 500 patents, not bad for a Midwestern kid who's just getting started. Tom was, yeah, good. Thank you. Tom was inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame. That's people like Edison, the Wright brothers, big contributors. 15 years ago on this site, well, not on this site actually, Tom founded the Fogarty Institute, a not-for-profit medtech educational incubator with the goal of facilitating the training of the next generation of Tom Fogartys. And that mission continues under Andrew Cleland's incredible leadership at Fogarty Innovation. So Andrew, thank you very much. In 2014, we had a unique opportunity when Dr. Fogarty at the White House received the National Medal for Technology Innovation from then President Barack Obama. Dr. Fogarty's bio is in the brochure. It's pretty good reading. And take a look at the past lecturers. It's a who's who in medtech and technology innovation. 23 in all. 6 of the past Fogarty lecturers are here, including Dr. Fogarty, Rodney Perkins, Paul Yock, Casey McGlynn, Deb Kilpatrick, and I haven't seen Brooke Byers yet, but he was anticipated to be here. Mir Imran, the 24th Fogarty lecturer, is a most worthy addition to the roster. Mir is chairman and CEO of InQ Labs, a prolific healthcare innovator and entrepreneur who has been developing, commercializing, and solving patient problems for over 40 years. Mir's wife, Christine, and extended families join us in the second row there. Thank you all so much for sharing Mir and for your role in Mir's journey. Mir began his career as a healthcare entrepreneur in the late 70s with pioneering contributions to the FDA's first approved implantable defibrillator. Since then, he's founded more than 20 life science companies, 2 tech companies, and 13 of the med tech companies have gone on to see liquidity events. His most recent event, Ronnie Therapeutics, went public on the NASDAQ in 21. Mir's inventions literally have saved the lives of millions of patients and become standards of care. He's developed innovative therapies for a number of chronic diseases, and we just mentioned Ronnie. Mir holds more than 1,800 patents worldwide. QMed named Mir as one of the top 50 medical inventors of all time. Think about that. He's a fellow in the National Academy of Engineering, the National Academy of Inventors, and the American Institute of Medical and Biomedical Engineers. He also is co-founder and managing director of InCube Ventures, a medtech, biotech venture capital firm. He served on the boards of multiple life science companies and on the advisory board for Lemelson, and an adjunct professor at the University of Pittsburgh. He actively supports education and training in innovation and entrepreneurship, both in the United States and in India, especially for underprivileged kids. Mir's bio is also in your booklet, and it should also be a source of inspiration. Please join me in welcoming Mir Imran. As we planned this fireside chat, Mir wanted to highlight a few selected stories of how the magic happened. We all know Mir. Before we dig into the medtech, two little interesting trivia bits. We all know Mir as a medtech pioneer, but did you know that his creativity extends far beyond medtech? Like what? Two selected examples. Number one, technology developed by Mir in the late 80s allowed access by authorized persons to private property with a unique electronic code. It also documented access and monitored. It was acquired by Supra GE in 1989. We all know it as the lockbox. Voila. Number two, technology developed at InCube Labs provided a safe and less intrusive alternative to metal detectors and pat-downs. Can you imagine what that might be used for? It was sold to L3 Communications in 2006. We know it today as the Airport Body Scanner, ubiquitous in the world's transportation networks, and those of us, like me, with a joint replacement, know it well. There you have that. I can't tell you how much fun it's been for me to dig into Mir's treasure trove of inventions, innovations, and their successful commercialization. So today's focus is on medtech, and Mir is going to tell 4 stories that illustrates principles through the stories. The concepts will try to build on one another, and we've had a really good time trying to pull it together as something that was cohesive and thoughtful and would teach a next generation. We'll start first with his thoughts on the process of innovation, one that's studied and thought about both at Stanford Biodesign and at Fogarty, but I think Mir's got his own thoughts, and I found them incredibly instructive. The next story we'll look at is the internal defibrillator. A remarkable piece of equipment solving a really life-threatening problem. The third piece will be the diagnostic mapping and ablative therapy for cardiac arrhythmias. And finally, Ronnie Therapeutics' approach to put an injection in a pill. So with that, Mir, let's have you kind of start talking through with us how you think about the process of innovation, how you work through a sequence of a problem, potential solution, commercial success, and bringing it to the bedside. So again, it's wonderful to have you here, Mir. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I start talking about innovation, let me first say thank you for inviting me here. It's such a huge honor. And Tom, you have been, whether you like it or not, you have been a mentor to me for the last 35 years. And you may not know this, but I have really learned a lot just watching you. And there's so many others, Paul York, Casey, good to see you here after such a long time. And Rodney, where's Rodney?
Don't see him yet, but...
Yeah. And Josh McHower, he's another icon in MedTech. Josh, so good to see you. I'm glad you're back in the Bay Area. And so, you know, my journey started a long time ago in the late 70s. And as a young scientist, engineer, I was truly interested in the whole process of creativity and in what we call innovation, invention. And I was intrigued by how we do it. Is it always accidental? In fact, throughout history, it has been an accidental thing. But I was really interested in seeing if there is a process that I can follow and what that would be. And I read a bunch of books in those late 70s. There weren't that many. There was one book written by a Stanford professor that was particularly interesting called Higher Creativity. But even that didn't explain how to do it, how to practice innovation at will, how to do that at will. And so I decided, and I was doing some of these innovations on my own. Probably intuitively, I was following a process that I couldn't articulate. So I decided to become an observer of that process in me. So to see if there was a pattern that would emerge. And it took the next 15 years of conscious observation and trying to figure it out. And really, in around the mid-90s, early to mid-90s, I began to see some hope of understanding that. So the other thing that I decided to do is define the terms around innovation. When we talk about innovation, we use the terms very loosely. Innovation itself is a word that has got so many meanings, and from politicians, how they use it, to scientists and lay people, it means different things to different people. But in the context of practicing innovation, I decided to define it, and because unless you define something, you cannot own it, you cannot teach it. So the simple definition that I came up with was innovation is the identification of a problem that's worth solving and framing of the problem, which by that I mean really understanding so deeply that you can frame it very succinctly. It doesn't matter, it's not the solution. To me, the solutions are the inventions that emanate from that definition, that framing. So that has really helped me because from that point on, I've just focused on problems. I don't care about solutions, because once you frame it, once you identify a problem and frame it, without even solving it, there can be a dozen people who'll solve it with many different inventions. So to me, that was a very powerful insight that I gained. Whether it's right or not, I don't know, but it has helped me, and I think it can be taught. And I know that biodesign has done an amazing job of teaching innovation. But I think the biodesign focus, which I think necessarily was the right thing to do, was to change the way people think, the way people observe, their power of observation, critical observation. And the process Paul, you and Josh developed really hits that point home. And so by need finding, coming up with an irrational number, go find 500 problems. It was a brilliant way of teaching people to observe everything, to question everything, look at everything as a potential problem. Don't accept anything at face value. So luckily, I had that growing up. So I was really looking to see what happens when you find a problem. So there are two questions that I think are really important in innovation. One is, identifying, when you identify a problem, ask the question whether the problem is worthy of solution. And that question leads you necessarily to a list of criteria that you can come up with to answer that question, that whether the problem is worth solving or not. And then the second question is, when you come up with solutions, is the solution worth commercializing? When you, and for each one of those questions, you can come up with attributes of problems and attributes of solutions that are, that can be used to filter out what you shouldn't be working on. Not every problem needs to be solved, and not every solution has commercial potential. So those are the simple things that I learned just observing what I was doing. And I, again, Paul, one of these days you'll have to tell me where, where there are gaps in my understanding.
Yeah, it is interesting that the great innovators around and the 2 or 3 major medtech incubators are all thinking very much in terms of the same line of reasoning, that if you really understand the problem, the solution almost becomes self-evident. And Josh and Paul have frequently said that becomes the DNA of the solution. Mir, in our conversations, you talked, I thought, thoughtfully about incremental innovation versus disruptive innovation. You've tended to focus on disruptive. You have a thought or two on that?
Yeah. So. So the definition is kind of obvious, but as an engineer, I like to define things. I don't like to leave things to imagination. So incremental innovation clearly is an improvement to an existing product or service that makes that product or service better. So that's kind of obvious. When you talk about disruptive innovations, generally speaking, you are, rather than focused on a specific problem, a specific solution to improve it, you have to go back to the problem and perhaps redefine it, re-understand it, and maybe that new understanding leads to a disruptive solution, disruptive innovation. So one is focused on existing solutions, how to improve them. The other focused on problems that you spend time with that problem, understand it, iterate on the solutions till you get a good solution. And that once you have that, a disruptive solution, then for life cycle, it goes into the cycle of incremental innovations.
Yeah.
Every product does that.
That's right. The copycats follow. And I think Mir, in his discussion with the student teams this afternoon, kind of pointed out that while disruptive innovation is, by definition, harder, the intellectual property space is much more wide open because you're not plowing the same ground, and the opportunities are typically much greater. And I think the second story we're going to touch bases on here is one of Mir's most profoundly disruptive solutions, and that's the implantable cardioversion defibrillator, work begun in the 70s. So as Mir and I talked, he pointed out that the problem to be solved was the detection. Got to know that it's VFib and not VTAC, and that's an interesting, really sidebar conversation, but for the electrophysiologists in the audience. But then to treat it with an implantable system, because otherwise we wait till someone falls down on the ground in cardiac arrest, and then we go look for a external defibrillator. There's a large body of patients that are at high risk, having had previous arrests. And so Mir, you think about, that's a 10-year problem bare minimum the day you start thinking about it. Mir first developed this with Intech Systems, which was then acquired by Lilly, later spun out as Guidant, later acquired by Boston for $26 billion. So, Mir, in 10 minutes, tell us about that saga, please.
Well, this is going to take the rest of the hour.
Well, The
So,
time is yours.
you know, clearly in a project or product or solution of that magnitude, there are so many people who contribute. And the single most important name in that is that of cardiologist from Baltimore named Michel Mirowski. Mirowski was just an amazing guy. He was a passionate guy. And his passion for the defibrillators started because his best friend died of sudden cardiac death, and there was no one to resuscitate him. So that became a lifelong journey for him. And I got involved because I had, he had come to Rutgers Medical School to give a talk, and I met with him, and the head of the chief of surgery, Dr. McKenzie, introduced us, and he said, "This crazy Indian kid can do anything, so he might be able to help you." So that's how I got to meet him. Fast forward a couple of years, so at that time I was working on deep brain stimulation for implantable deep brain stimulation systems, hand-built for rhesus monkeys, for psychiatric research. And so I had a little bit of implant experience, nothing commercial. But, I was always I would always say that, yeah, I can do it, well beyond my capability. And it was, and it actually pushed me. It was a good device. It pushed me to perform. Once you say I can do it, you have to prove that you can actually do it. And I think many of us, I don't know if others experience that. You're smiling. What about you? Yes. Yes. Yeah. So the defibrillator journey was difficult to begin with because the understanding of cardiac arrhythmias was not great. And our understanding at that time was that people died of fibrillation, spontaneous fibrillation. So our first device we designed to detect only fibrillation. And tachycardia, which is, spiky signals, were ignored. Even if it's a high rate, hemodynamically unstable tachycardia, we ignored it. And the first 10 patients would, and these were really the sickest patients, they would have an episode, they would fall down, and the device wouldn't fire for minutes. And until their VT deteriorated into VF and they're on the brink of death, this device would wake up and shock them and bring them back. And so that was a huge concern for us, and we stopped the clinical trial at that point, put Holter monitors on these patients, and realized that our detection was inadequate. We were not detecting these high-rate tachycardias. And because we had these big, giant patch electrodes, electrograms from those were not usually, they were very slow waveforms, and you couldn't reliably detect heart rate. So in one of these trips to American Heart Association and so on, we ran into a guy named Roger Winkle, who's an amazing cardiac electrophysiologist. He was at Stanford at the time, and he invited me to come and, he was doing program stimulation to induce tachyarrhythmias. Rodney, welcome. So I used to come with a tape recorder modified to be able to record cardiac signals in his cath lab and record these things on tapes, take them back to Pittsburgh, play them through detection circuits, and perfect those. And then we created the second generation. Now, FDA was amazingly easy to work with in those days. We would call them up and said, hey, we're going to make this improvement, this change, and we're going to send you the report. By phone, we would say that, and they say, okay, just send it to us. And, this happened like within weeks after each. It's unbelievable. I mean, but we didn't kill anybody. We were careful.
First sign of medical technology success is we didn't kill
yeah,
anybody.
I mean, so
Make a note.
You can't even imagine what a scary time it was for me to see these, the decisions we were making were life and death decisions for these patients. And Roger was a huge help, and went back, and that device worked. We got amazing success, and that success rate that we had for that second generation device has not been bested since then. Even the most modern ICDs still have the same kind of success rate we got 40 years ago. And so in 1982, 83, Eli Lilly came in as an investor in the company, and in 85 they acquired. And now I'll add another story. In and around 85 or 84, towards the beginning of 85, I met a guy named Ray Williams and Bill Starling at a cardiac ACC or AHA, I don't remember which one. And they said, Mir, you got to come out to California and help us, let's build another defibrillator company. And so, I said, okay. Lilly was in the process of acquiring it. They acquired the company, and I got in my car and came out to California, and was immediately sued, and joined from, I fought that with Harold Hobart was my lawyer, and we went to Pittsburgh many times. It was a long 6-7 months of litigation, and then Venturetex was running out of cash, but Ray Williams told me, Mir, don't worry about it. I'm behind you. I mean, he was an amazing guy. Many of you probably know of him. He was, he had as big or bigger impact on medtech than any scientist or physician or engineer. He was really, I can't say enough about him. And he was an amazing woodworker. And I used to occasionally go on weekends and help him with some woodworking project. He had an amazing workshop. Casey, you may have seen it. He was quite a remarkable guy. So Venturetex, I never was able to work there, but that went on to become a success, and that's the story of the defibrillator.
Stunning story. Do you have that original device?
I do. I left it in the
Okay.
conference room.
So at the time of the reception, Mir has Smithsonian Institute quality devices, and it's pretty hefty. But obviously,
it was about just shy of a pound, 1 pound of solid metal implanted in the belly, and then wires tunneled to the heart. It was barbaric, what can I say, but it saved lives.
And it was best in class. And what's interesting to me as we continue the story is the iterative process, right? So we didn't understand that VTAC could be just as bad as VFib, but you had to figure that out. And I think, with great electrophysiologists like Paul Wong, the coming sub-segmentation of our knowledge then led Mir to think about, well, after the arrhythmia happens and someone drops, maybe we could move upstream a little bit in the treatment of arrhythmias, and instead of waiting for the problem and continually shocking them, maybe we could identify that irritable focus or foci in the myocardium and then cure the lethal arrhythmias all at once and all together. So this involved another piece of the diagnostic piece of diagnostic mapping and detection of arrhythmia foci, and then the targeted destruction of the lesion, and another little tiptoe through the tulips discussion of that project, please, Mir.
So that was way harder than developing the ICD. Mapping the heart, a beating heart, and trying to figure out where the foci are for the arrhythmia, where the reentry pathways are, and then be able to position another steerable catheter for ablating those areas. Incredibly difficult, and we spent years developing the technology. And the worst part was it took hours, several hours, half a day sometimes, to treat a patient. And the exposure to X-rays was unbelievable. And that got repeated with AFib ablation. And even today, AFib ablation is challenging. So it was a challenging thing. But in those patients that got ablated in the right place, their arrhythmia was cured. Mm-hmm. But it was a hard procedure. And I don't know if any of you, you're practicing cardiac electrophysiologist, you would know how difficult these things are.
For the lay people in the audience, I've often heard Fred St. Gore, when he was talking about the MitraClip, to say, we're doing all this thing inside a washing machine that's working. And so the ringing motion associated with the way the heart compresses and contracts, blood rushes in, so you got a real moving target problem. Were there insights into how you identified and how you stabilized the catheter? Was there a piece in that story?
The approach we took was to put a basket catheter that went in and expanded and contacted the ventricle, usually in the left side, and map it, and then while that catheter is there, put another catheter to steer to the right place. Mm-hmm. So, and using computers and graphics and to highlight it, it was not easy.
Yeah.
Is it easier now? Okay.
It's not that easy. Tell us about the original name, because
cardiac pathways.
Yeah, but this was a cryoablation. And
no. So we were using RF ablation.
Ah, okay.
So one of the challenges with RF ablation inside the heart was that the tip would get so hot that the blood would clot. So you'd bring the catheter out with a whole big clot on it. So I came up with a simple solution to cool the tip actively with saline, and while ablating, and worked beautifully. And I think that technique is still in use 35 years later. It was called the chili catheter, but many companies are using that chilled ablation, RF ablation. So that has remained as a workhorse.
Yeah. No, the chili catheter, I remember in our conversations. And again, it's such a great story of the iterative process of moving from, okay, now we can identify the lesion, we can get an ablative catheter to it, then it's too hot, okay, how do we cool it? I mean, I think the entrepreneur's gift is to sort of, run from unsolvable problem to unsolvable problem with unbridled optimism over and over and over again. And for the young people in the audience, if you don't have that, why, go into valet parking. It's a lot more predictable.
Yeah.
This was another. This was a guide. Remind me on the acquisition of this one.
Boston Scientific.
Boston. That's right.
Yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah.
right. That's right. Any other insights, that are worth the audience hearing about before we move out of the heart? And
No, I think I spent enough time in the heart. I want to get out of there.
But it also is interesting. We were talking about how the beehive of Silicon Valley has people that develop talent. Now all of a sudden in the Valley, we got people that understand cardiac mapping, that understand ways to approach and lesion areas that are problematically difficult, and you sort of build out this network of people and capabilities, and the VP of engineering becomes the chief operating officer or the CEO of the next company. And I think
Yep.
that's been a really powerful component. Sometime it'd be fun to do kind of a genealogy chart of the Fogartys and where'd they go, and the John Simpsons and the Yawks and the Perkins and the Imrans. I mean, I think it's just, having now been out of the Valley for 18 months, you really appreciate the deep, deep experience that is resident in people who live here and that are your friends and colleagues. I mean, it's pretty special. And then we aggregate them at places like Biodesign, aggregate them at places like here, aggravate them maybe at places like InCube. Okay. Moving on to the next big and more recent adventure, and that's Rani Therapeutics. Some of you may or may not be aware of this, but this is a disruptive technology for the oral delivery of biologics, so peptides, proteins, or antibodies, which ordinarily, if you took them as a pill, gastric acid denatures proteins, and so none of those can be taken as a pill. And so that acid environment is the enemy of delivering those kind of compounds. Now, we were talking with the students today. The drug companies say, well, no big deal, just a daily injection. Those in the audience who want to contemplate that, how much fun is a daily injection? Can that be done at home? You have to go into someone's office. And if you think about the compliance associated with oral medication, which is 60% at best. The compliance with injectable compounds is even worse. So big problem, and the average person will say, well, just get an injection. But undaunted, Mir said, well, there's got to be another way to try to move these peptide biologics safely through the GI tract until a process can be done, and that is the story of Rani Therapeutics. So take it away, Mir.
Thank you. So of all the crazy things I've done in my life, this is probably the hardest, most difficult project for a variety of reasons. So this whole thing started with a very casual chance conversation with a senior executive from Eli Lilly, who was visiting me. Some of you may know John Lecleiter. He was the former head of Lilly. And I asked him what he came there for, and he said, there was some board meeting, and there was a company they had invested a lot of money in to convert a peptide, I think it was parathyroid hormone, to an oral formulation. And it failed. They were shutting down the company. So my first question was, do they have equipment for sale? And the second question was, why did they fail? And he said, well, we had very low expectations because, and I had never thought about oral delivery of biologics. So then I found out through research that there have been 150 separate attempts. Somebody has taken the trouble to count them over the last 50 years, only focused on insulin, parathyroid hormone, and a couple of other short peptides. 150 attempts. Bioavailability in those cases, in best cases, were 1% or less, 0.5%, 0.1%. So I thought about it, and I said, well, we know that injections work. And I also remembered from the GI tract physiology that you don't have sharp pain receptors, the kind of sensory receptors you have in the skin. So I said, why can't we make a pill that you swallow and goes into the intestine, transforms itself into an injection, and delivers a pain-free injection?
Piece of cake, right?
Piece of cake. Is there a video that is
Yes,
lined
yes.
up? So it's a 1-minute video that you can.
Okay, and there we go.
Rani Therapeutics, an InCube Labs company, has created a novel approach for the delivery of biologics orally. In this video, we will demonstrate how the Rani pill, our oral delivery platform, works. Here you see a patient swallowing what appears to be a standard capsule. The capsule has a special enteric coating that protects it from the acidic environment in the stomach. When the capsule encounters the higher pH levels found in the small intestine, the enteric coating and outer shell of the capsule dissolve, exposing the delivery mechanism to intestinal fluid. The mechanism has a self-inflating balloon that contains 2 reactants separated by a dissolvable valve. Exposure to intestinal fluid dissolves the valve, allowing the reactants to mix, creating carbon dioxide. This inflates the balloon and creates the pressure needed to inject a dissolvable microneedle containing the drug or sensor into the intestinal wall. The intestinal injection is pain-free, as the intestines have no sharp pain receptors. The balloon then deflates and is safely passed out. In the case of drug delivery, the drug is quickly absorbed by the highly vascularized intestinal wall. A daily pill as an alternative to an injection is expected to have a very positive impact on patient compliance. Compliance is further enhanced by a digital wireless compliance monitoring system incorporated into the Rani pill. The Rani pill contains a tiny wireless sensor that is activated once the needle is delivered. Upon delivery, a radio transmitter embedded in the microsyringe emits a signal to an external receiver. An app on the patient's cell phone records the date and time of drug delivery and transmits this information to a cloud-based database. If a patient forgets to take the Rani pill, the smartphone app sends a reminder message to the patient, which can further improve compliance. During clinical trials, knowing the exact time of drug delivery is very helpful in pharmacokinetics studies with short half-life drugs. In addition, the data from all the patient's cell phones will be collated via the cloud by the CRO. Rani wireless monitoring can also be used in post-market.
Voila.
Thank you. So you can see it's a 25-cent cost of goods or less piece of plastic, some Alka-Seltzer-like chemicals that inflate the balloon, and the balloon lines it up to the intestine and delivers a pain-free injection. And we have conducted 2 clinical studies, one with octreotide somatostatin and the other one with parathyroid hormone. And we are embarking on Humira and many other antibody drugs. We can deliver 100% of the biologic drugs that are out there. And a number of pharma companies, of course, are after us also. But we have taken 5 or 6 of the drugs that are off patent and created our internal pipeline. So we are developing our own drugs, and we'll, of course, work with pharma companies. So, it looks simple, and conceptually it is simple, but it was every step of the way we had to, the needle made out of sugar. How many of you have made injection molded a sugar needle? It turns into caramel. And so it really, everything was difficult. The shape of the balloon, how do you make the balloon so that it works in every size intestine, not just a particular size? So that took a few years. How do you create a coating, enteric coating that completely seals it off? Not even a little bit of moisture gets in. We had to come up with new formulations of coatings. So it was one challenge after another. 300 patents in this young company. I think we're on a path to, hopefully, to success. Still a lot of work to be done, but we now are really getting into clinical trials, manufacturing scale up. So I'm super excited about this. It'll help millions of people, tens of millions of people, and it is the hardest thing I've done. I was telling Paul that I just want to retire after this. So
That'll be a cold day. So who would have invested in the idea of Ronnie Therapeutics? So we're going to take this pill. It's got a coating. The coating's going to dissolve. We got needles made of sugar. We got a balloon that pops open when an Alka-Seltzer tablet fizzes. Like, that sounds like the worst investment possible. How did you raise money for this, other than your own?
We were the first. My fund was the first investor. Then Google got wind of it, and Google came in as the Series B investor, and then we brought in some pharma partners came in, Novartis, AstraZeneca, Shire. So, and then a number of family offices from China and South America. So it was not a single venture capitalist, because you're right, nobody in their right mind would invest in it.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's almost sort of Rube Goldberg-ish, except it's brilliant in the sequence and the pathways. And for the non-physicians in the audience, there's just an enormous difference between being able to take a pill in the morning and somehow trying to figure out how to have someone stab you in the arm with a needle.
So one of the biggest challenges was knowing what is the size of the human intestine. So you talk to GI docs, they'll tell you, oh, it's approximately this much. And I said, well, what's the range? Nobody knows. Nobody had to know. There was no need to know that. So I made a deal with the CEO of Sutter Health, and they do about 400 or 500 organ transplants. And I said, I want to buy the intestines. You're not transplanting those. So we started getting human intestines, freshly harvested, and I hired a pathologist on staff, and her job was to meticulously section every 10, 15 centimeters. So we created a database of human intestinal anatomy. And it was quite revealing, and that really helped us create a device that would work across the whole spectrum of sizes. So that alone, what I just described, took 2 or 3 years of effort to not only collect the data, but make sense of it and then develop the solution. So, not easy.
No, sounds really hard to me. I think if a biodesign kid had come up with this, we'd have probably told him to go do something a little easier. But that's the beauty of blue sky kind of thing and a lifetime of experience. So Mir, how do you think about that challenge of now you got this thing and you got multiple competing companies, all of whom want to use it, and do you want to stay Switzerland or do you want to capitulate to the highest bidder? Or how do you think about that?
Well, there are approximately 100 biologic drugs out there. And so we're in conversations right now about specific drugs or sometimes specific targets. So no one company has all the drugs. So I think we're going to end up with multiple partners, potentially.
Nice. This has been a spectacular tiptoe through a 40-year career of remarkable contributions in med tech development. It's just so many great insights, and I've been privileged to spend some time kind of prepping for this. But the creative ingenuity, like the story you just heard, or all of the stories with these life-saving consequences for millions of patients, is just truly unbelievable. And I think everyone in the audience and every one of your colleagues and friends in the Valley, see you as one of the inhabitants of the Mount Olympus of medtech inventors and innovators, and we're so grateful for your contributions and for your teaching and your presence here today. Mir, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have, so every year we have a Fogarty Eagle Award. So there are only 24 of these on the planet, so don't drop it or don't lose it. And the concept is the taking flight of young ideas and young-minded people. And again, I think these have just been priceless stories, and so we're so grateful. There's an opportunity now. We'll get into the refrigerated part of the thing for a wine cheese reception and a chance to reconnect with each other, since it's been such a long time since we've all had a chance to congregate. So again, thank you all for your participation, and here, thank you. Fantastic.